Welcome.
Hello.
Hi, Danni.
Hi.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi.
It's nice to have you back.
Thanks for having
Danni.
me again.
Well, you were such a pleasure to have on the last
Oh,
episode.
that was lucky, wasn't
We
it?
are glad to have you here again. We are speaking all things mental health today.
Exciting. One of my favourite topics.
Yeah.
You'll probably hear me every time I'm on here. You'll ask me, like, you'll be like,
all
this
your
topic. I'm
favourite
like, oh my gosh, my favourite topic.
Yes.
Every time.
Yeah,
but we
Danny's our
might
resident
just-
OT nerd.
Yeah. I'm proud of it.
That's right. But Danny is doing a lot of work on some of our one of our next events, which is on mental health. So she's kind of up with it a little bit. So we thought, who better to ask to join us again than
Ooh,
Danny?
that's a like big promise that I've got.
I know.
No.
Up-to-date
Yeah.
information.
So live up to the expectations.
Absolutely. Please do. But we should just put a little disclaimer here that
Yes.
we are speaking about mental health today, and we may speak of things such as triggers or suicidal ideation or anything in that realm. So just please listen at your discretion and speak to someone if you need to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But why don't we start by, I suppose, just sharing what we as OTs do in this space, because I think it's a really misunderstood area by a lot of clinicians and external to clinicians, I suppose, as to what our role is in supporting paediatric mental health.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's the thing too, because in paediatrics, we can only speak to what it looks like
Yes,
in paediatrics.
exactly.
Because that's our jam. So, because I guess there's that confusion a lot of the time between like OTs do emotional regulation, and there's sometimes that confusion that only mental health OTs do mental health.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess in paediatrics, that's not really the case.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's tricky.
Yeah.
Because there's mental health OTs and then there's paediatric OTs.
Yeah.
And we forget that sometimes I think that paediatrics are little people who often have mental health challenges and mental health goals that, come alongside other things that we're working on. And it's really tricky to differentiate, but we also understand that there's so many different roles even within paediatric OT. So
That's it.
I guess we can only speak from our experience. But,
absolutely.
I think that even we've spoken before about our experience of covering mental health at uni, and everyone on the team has such different perspectives even then
Yeah.
around what
Yeah.
knowledge we even, I guess, leave uni with.
Yeah. And it's funny, I said to you when we were talking about doing this episode that when I was at uni, I had this very strong idea that I wanted to be a mental health OT.
And started there.
And I did start there, sort of, in that I wasn't a formal OT in that role, I guess. I was employed as a youth worker, I suppose, but worked in a space with adolescents who were experiencing mental health challenges in their life, and it was a residential respite sort of setting. But in my brain, I thought I had to be specifically looking for a role that was titled mental health occupational therapist. And it wasn't until I started, further exploring what that could look like and found Kid Link, I suppose, and realised that, like you said earlier, Jack, that a lot of young people have mental health challenges that do really impact their functioning, and can be a really important place for us to be starting when we're trying to develop skills and improve function in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, so we want to recognise that we have sort of carved out a bit of a space, like all private practices and all OTs,
Yes.
to sort of build on their scope and develop their scope. So we really acknowledge that we feel that we've really done a lot of work in that space to upskill and feel confident addressing a lot of mental health within kids.
Yeah.
And we know that that's not always the case, but we also feel that all OTs do have a role. It's so we hope that, by listening to this episode, we can kind of share some of that knowledge about where to go, or just some of our insights around what our role can look like and how that might vary compared to some other different disciplines and things like that.
I think I find it really interesting because I did my undergrad in psychology.
Yeah.
So my undergrad was a Bachelor of Applied Science, psych. And then I went and did my master's in OT practice. And so for me, there was never a question.
Yeah.
There was always a crossover. Like for me,
Yeah.
there was never really, like I knew there was mental health OTs, but like I always knew I wanted to be a paed OT. And for me, there was always mental health in OT because that was the lens through which I came into my master's in.
Yeah.
And so I have, it's really interesting to me when that question comes up of like, when I speak to other OTs and I'm like, you don't work with mental health?
Yes.
Like other paediatric OTs, and we don't work with significant physical disability. So there's
definitely,
we don't
so
touch that stuff.
There's
really.
so much breadth and opportunity within OT, which is what I love about it. But yeah, there's that real I guess a sensitivity or apprehension from some paediatric OTs to dive into mental health. And hopefully after today that's kind of lifted a little bit to know that you can do this. This is in your scope.
And I don't know if unis have changed much of the coursework now. I'd be interested to know from new OTs.
I mean, I studied slightly later than you guys, and there was a lot of mental health in my course. And a lot of general mental health. Like it wasn't just, like when you're a mental health OT, you do this. It was always considering mental health factors.
I do remember doing like a mental health module.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
But I do also recall mental health being sort of scattered in other modules. I think one of my most common lecturers, she was working in mental health, so I feel like she brought a lot of her experience to what we were learning, even if it wasn't specifically regarding mental health, occupational therapy. But I think that it's something that we hope through our conversation today as well that perhaps if we've got other professions that are listening as well that might not understand really what OT can bring to the party, I suppose, in a multi-dis setting, that, we really do value our role for these kids and these goals.
And I guess a lot of it starts with the cohort or the population that we work with because there is such a high co-occurrence of conditions, of mental health conditions within the neurodivergent population. And so we work with majority neurodivergent young people. So we've got autistic young people, our ADHDers, and then within that comes so much mental health crossover.
Absolutely.
So it's always
often
part
it's
and parcel.
the goal that we feel or that the family feels is almost the most pivotal goal to address.
Has the most functional impact.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that's where OTs sometimes shy away, is that idea of function. I think that's where we feel it is 100% within our scope. If it's impacting on function, it's within our it's our job to address it. And that's not to say all of it. There's things that are outside our scope for sure, where we would refer on or we work alongside psychologists and other mental health professionals, and really closely with the psychiatrist or the paediatrician if there is one on board. But I guess where do you guys see the differentiation? Like where would you what kinds of clients would you refer on?
I guess this is a good point to point out that we are, all three of us are BAM registered or BAM endorsed. So we're better access to mental health care professionals or practitioners. So we've got that additional sort of lens through which we look at things, which definitely makes it sort of that has that extra responsibility or extra skills or whatever it might be.
We may feel like if you were to perhaps chat to some of our other OTs that don't have that registration, they might answer this question differently in terms of what they feel is in their scope compared to what we may say as well. But
on that as well, I know I'm like getting tangential.
When don't you?
It's only episode 3. People don't know that yet. But it's also hard to get BAM endorsed for mental health within paediatrics.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the whole thing. Like, I guess we got there, and I guess we have carved out like a bit of a, like, we've really targeted our practice to get that experience, and we mentor our more junior team members as they come through. So we hope that by the end they have enough exposure. But it is really tricky to get the clientele without the endorsement to get the experience. So it becomes a bit of a chicken or an egg.
It does.
And so I guess justifying in pediatrics that you've got the experience to apply for BAM is a tricky thing.
Yeah.
If you're in a real specific mental health space,
Yes.
you get your 2 years
you can
experience.
quickly say
it's
you've got
pretty
your 2
easy to
years.
justify. But
Yes.
Paeds can be viewed a
broad.
bit generalist, and I know that with OTA that can be tricky for them to really get an idea of what exposure you truly have before they put, for lack of a better description, their stamp on you and say we will endorse that person. So sorry, that was tangential, but I think
I'm going to bring you back.
Yeah.
Because I think your question was an interesting one, because I guess in terms of like a diagnostic profile, there's no diagnostic profile that I would ever say, no, I don't work with that person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like there's no diagnosis that would come through the door that I would be like, I don't work with
we don't
schizophrenic
have
clients, or I don't work with, not that I've ever worked with a schizophrenic client, being the cohort that we work with is not a typical diagnosis anyway. But I think really it comes down to the presentation and the presentation of the client, the goals of the client, and where they're at in terms of their mental health journey, and who they have as part of their mental health team. Because like I think that plays a really big role. We're not a crisis service. So we require clients with mental health diagnoses, such as like more complex mental health diagnoses, like those that might have suicidal ideation or self-harming or really like complex mental health presentations, to have some kind of team behind them, because that's not our jam. We need to have
need to have a crisis.
We also
team
see
behind
them
absolutely
in terms
more
of just
primary support.
our physical setting, in terms of we see them fortnightly for 45
That's
minutes.
it.
So yes, if they're needing more regular or crisis type services, we need to ensure that that is in place. And I suppose we as OTs are always coming back to function. So
if they're well enough to have functional goals, then
yes, they're in the right place.
That's right.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. I had a discussion actually this morning with my sister, and she was saying, so my sister's a mental health clinician in the public setting, and she works in a paediatric space as well, more assessment triage space. And she had a friend of hers ask about their 7-year-old son who's experiencing chronic tummy pain at the moment, which they have been able to problem solve down to interoceptive sort of confusion around, like, is this because I'm feeling sick, or is it because I'm feeling anxious? And mum and dad are pretty suspicious that actually we are on the anxiety side. Mum's actually also a nurse, so has that good sort of medical understanding. And my sister said to me, they asked me for a recommendation of like a professional, and she said I was hesitant I didn't know whether or not to recommend an OT or a psych. And she said, I don't really know. And I said, look, you could, like, it's fail safe. Like, but either of those ways that you go, like, if the OT is competent in mental health and feels confident targeting mental health goals, you could definitely go that. But this little man is having functional impacts to his school attendance and to his participation in the school setting, because they're calling mum to come pick him up from school because he's got tummy pains, which we think are coming from anxiety. And that is the perfect example of a client that would fit really well in an OT setting like ours.
Participation. How many goals do we get for school partners?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's really, it's such a key part, and mental health is, I mean, it is basically one in the same with school can't.
That's it.
You can't address it unless you feel confident addressing some mental health goals in there.
That's it.
I think that,
and then add in a bit of sensory interoceptive stuff in there, and you've got a recipe for OT, really, in terms of, and that's not to say that, like, we have anxious clients or clients with anxiety diagnoses who at points in their therapeutic journey, I've been like, actually, and I have several at the moment where I've been like, this is actually beyond my capacity right now. But sorry, not my capacity, my scope. It's beyond my scope as an occupational therapist, because your needs are beyond just functional needs.
Absolutely.
You need treatment, or this client needs treatment for their mental health condition. And that's different to what OTs provide.
I've also had quite a few parents, I suppose, when they've been umming and ahhing or not sure, should we do psych, should we do OT, or they're in both, particularly younger clients, I would say, that I've had feedback from parents that OTs are a lot more hands-on, skill-based, and for young clients that can just be simply more engaging than, I suppose, more talking therapies, and that they feel for their child, that the things that we're teaching, because they're so function based, that they're more easily applied by the child and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
and arguably at times we also like the scope of our practice allows us to often visit the child at school,
Yes,
and we work much more
See them
closely
in
with
their
the
natural
family
environments.
because our model is very family centered.
Yes.
So we deal with the families quite closely in all aspects of our
Yeah.
therapy. So not that psychologists don't also often operate under that model, but it is a different approach to therapy.
is,
Usually
yeah.
they really go much more down the targeted focused psychological strategies.
and that's why it can also work so beautifully alongside each other as
that's
well.
right. Yeah.
I think the other thing that I think about when we think about the kind of populations that we support and those who we would choose not to support, like we just finished our dialectical behaviour training this week, therapy training this week. So DBT training, which is typically a protocol or a therapeutic approach that's used with individuals with borderline personality disorder, though, guys, get on it. Like, that thing is so transferable. Like, there is lots
It really
of,
was.
like-
We they couldn't shut us up. We had so many questions.
yeah.
Adolescent
Don't we always? We can
populations
talk.
But it also, like, something that came up as a discussion point in that is to provide comprehensive DBT, is to provide weekly group-based
Yes.
therapy, weekly individual therapy,
Yeah.
and telephone coaching.
Yeah.
So not only does like client presentation come into it, but evidence-based practice for specific conditions in terms of what a
Yes.
client is presenting with comes
Yes.
into it, and capacity of your
Yeah,
workplace.
what we can and can't meet. We just can't do that.
We just
Yeah.
can't do that. We
Well,
don't
that's,
have
that's
that.
why I think I asked, like,
Yeah.
can we actually do this without the phone call?
That's
Because
it.
It would be
Just-
irresponsible for us to
Yeah.
take on the sole treatment of a client like
Yeah.
that. And they were able to say you can cover some of the skills training and
Yeah,
things
you
like
can do it
that.
in
So
different
yeah, it
ways.
really is important to know your skill set, but also if you want to expand your skill set,
Yeah.
there are so many
Oh.
ways that you can do that.
Yeah.
I guess like thinking back to your journey, expanding on your skill set in mental health, what's kind of stood out as some of the things that you've really, has it been the clients that you've had on your caseload that have prompted you to do further learning, or do you think
Yeah.
Good question.
Well, it is a good question. I think that, like I said, I've always had an interest in this space. So, and I am keen to keep that endorsement
Yeah.
with the better access. It's very hard to get back if you don't. But I think from an OT lens, I've seen in so many different ages and so many different types of clients what a massive functional impact mental health challenges can have. And I've found, whether it be from, doing very, I say, basic sessions around educating the child on what anxiety is from a from a physiological standpoint, where they're like, oh, like that's why my body responds that way. It's not just something wrong with me, or it's just me. It's actually a very deeply ingrained bodily function that happens, right through to crisis management as well. I think that they all are really quite empowering for the individual. Yeah. What about yourself?
I think for me, like I said, I came into OT thinking that mental health was just a huge part of OT practice in general. So it was always a lens through which I looked. But I think the pathway that I've taken in terms of my interest, so for example, like I have a very huge interest in anxiety disorders.
Yeah.
That's a massive interest area of mine,
Yeah.
specifically OCD, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, anything with PDA, like not that PDA is an anxiety disorder, but anything that sits in that space. And so for me, that has driven a lot of my professional development. That's driven a lot of my interest in that area. So I've done additional training in OCD. I've done additional training in supporting anxious clients and CBT and all of those kinds of things. But for me, I'm very much like knowledge is like, no knowledge is ever enough. Like so like we did DBT because I was like, oh man, this is like
more.
so
Yes.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Like, so I think that, and also because we have clients who don't necessarily have the diagnosis that determines that would be helpful, but we have a lot of autistic clients who really struggle with distress tolerance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And DBT, one of the main elements of DBT is distress tolerance.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not even necessarily the population, but it's the symptomology or the the symptomology that leads to the functional impact that has led me to do additional
And I
professional
think,
development.
I hope people are listening because they do have some weird love of learning, or they're,
It's not weird, okay? It's a value and it's very valid.
She took that as a personal attack. I was lumping us all in, but yes, we acknowledge no one is on Danni's level when it comes to this.
There's people, they're listening right now, I can tell you that much.
So I suppose it is that if people are interested in that space, we would encourage you doing courses and expanding your knowledge in spaces that might not be directly related to your clientele, because so many of the tools really do transfer over really easily.
Yeah.
And they become useful. And I think we get stuck on sometimes, I mean, now we're going down the supervision space. See, I get tangential. But really staying so narrow focused on which kids we're supporting. So we go to supervision with direct kids and cases, and we talk about the things that could help them. But sometimes it really is important to be able to zoom out and zoom in and zoom out and be like, oh, how could I just expand my breadth of knowledge in pediatrics in general? So get interested in different courses, and you'll be surprised how much your knowledge transfers to all of your caseload, and you'll feel more confident exploring that as a goal. I think sometimes if we don't have the confidence in a space, we subconsciously close ourselves off
100%.
to exploring it.
I would say that's something that we do well, as well as often when any of our team members do any kind of PD, we at some stage will do some kind of team learning and discuss how we can apply our learnings into our practice, specifically here where we are working. And I think that's really important as well, because yes, like when we did go to the DBT training, there was countless professions that were there, and they're all learning the one thing, but it's going to look so different in terms of where they take that, how they do it, what they bring to it as their personal experience as well. So I would, encourage you to be open to learning new things, but also then really take the time to think about what does this mean for me and my clients as well.
Yeah. I mean, look at the focused psychological strategies.
Yes.
That's it.
Start there. Like if you're interested in getting your BAM or working towards it, or just feeling like you want to know a little bit more in the Paeds mental health space, I think that's a good place to start. Do I want to brush up on a bit of CBT? Do I want to look at all maybe it is a parent coaching element. We've all done coach approach and that really applies. Maybe it is some of Ross Green's training. That's a really good segue into other kinds of coaching, motivational
Maybe it's
interviewing.
circle of
We've
security.
done circle of security.
Yeah,
and
trauma.
all the trauma-informed courses. There's so many ways that you can upskill in that mental health space, and then really encourage you to, when you're addressing functional goals for your clients, which is what we're interested in as OTs, is thinking about, and we're trained to think about the whole person, and bring those clients to supervision. If they have functional mental health goals and you feel equipped and well supported, put yourself out there. We support and we supervision.
Yes, absolutely.
But we have a huge role to play in this space, and we're very passionate about it, and we really hope that other OTs join in that.
I think the other thing as well, though, that's really, really important to acknowledge is those PDs are really, really important. There's a couple, like, for example, your basic kind of CBT or your basic kind of anxiety, depression kind of modules, things that APS offer, like that are sort of your bread and butter, our upcoming foundations of mental health, those kinds of things. We're actually having that information, even if you are not targeting goals, but knowing what your client is presenting with, so then you know your right referral pathways.
Yeah, how it impacts.
That's
right. Yeah, there's probably OTs thinking, I don't want to touch mental health. I'm not interested in
Absolutely.
it. Like us with equipment prescription. We don't want to go there.
It's okay.
So that's also okay, but you do need to understand your client's presentations to be able to know where to refer and build a good referral pathway. And like you said, if they're not in crisis and they have functional goals, working closely alongside that client's mental health practitioner can really provide that support and that holistic care for that client.
Yeah. I will. Sorry, I was just going to say that I will also add to that even if you, want to stay away from mental health specifically, I think it's really important to acknowledge that generally, I think there was someone at our training that we went to this week that was in some kind of rehab setting with older adults and not mental health related specifically.
I think it was acute surgery recovery or something like that.
But she said you'd be surprised where mental health fits in with that. And I think that's really important because if you're working with physical disabilities or any other scope, there are going to be clients that their mental health needs to be addressed to some degree. And it is very likely that it's having a functional impact in some shape or form as well.
Absolutely. And I think then being able to recognize your role within that. So I think the thing that comes up for us really frequently is this difference between like generalized anxiety versus more of like an OCD presentation, and where we as a clinic have a pretty good understanding of differential diagnosis in terms of identifying the factors that might mean that client is an OCD presentation versus a GAD presentation.
Or an autism presentation.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Or so many other things. There is a lot of crossovers with OCD.
That can be,
But then also knowing that a CBT approach, a typical CBT approach that's not an exposure response prevention approach, might be more damaging for a client that is an OCD presentation. So therefore knowing what your scope is within that mental health presentation is so powerful and so in line with harm minimization and doing good and all of those like real core foundations.
Even if you're not offering it, by having an understanding of it, it means that you're not going to be offering the wrong thing.
That's it.
You can get your clients the support that they need elsewhere.
Absolutely. Exactly right. And I think it comes back to that idea that just you can do this. There is a difference between emotional regulation and mental health, and both are super, super important. But you can work in the mental health space if you are working from a functional lens. That is well within our scope, and you can do so much change.
Do we have an ep on goal setting? I feel like this is a good...
I think we might.
Well, there's a OT Link PD booster on goal setting.
That's a little plug.
A little plug.
You invited that. That's what you did. You invited that plug.
Because I think that's important. Often whether it's our role is in the goal. Isn't it? Hey, that rhymes.
Oh, no. Is it time to wrap up there?
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe we'll edit that bit out.
Okay. Well, this has been really interesting. But thank you, Danni, for joining Jackie and I today. We really see value in discussing these things from our perspective as OTs. We hope that if you are an OT listening and perhaps you haven't dabbled in the mental health space, that this has encouraged you to do so, or at least look for some learning opportunities.
Or disagree with our perspective.
Or you might disagree. That's okay as well, because it's your perspective.
Absolutely.
And we hope that if you are not an OT and you're a clinician and you are listening, that perhaps we've given you a little bit more understanding of why we love getting these referrals and seeing these kids, and what we feel our scope of role is here.
And how you might benefit from having an OT on your team.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll chat to you next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
See you later.
Bye.